Good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking some time away from your Amazon Prime shopping here on Prime Day. Come check out what I've been up to. So I know last week I had a little bit of bad news about having to rewrite some stuff because just some amateur code that I've done in the past a few years ago that I decided to recycle into this to be lazy, to make, save some time, ended up biting me in the ass. Anyways, I explained before that the issue with that code was the way that we were serializing data and deserializing data to and from text was causing an issue with some of the types that it didn't necessarily know or couldn't, automatically determine just by looking at what the data was. So what I did was to rewrite it now to be strongly typed, to completely ignore the setting groups and the setting object types and all that stuff that I was using to determine this stuff. And now it's purely just class objects and fields and properties, and then the additional stuff, the UI, the names and all that stuff is determined now by attributes on those properties. So I'm going to go ahead and show that stuff off. Just a warning, this episode is going to be like really techy and in-depth and might not be interest to most of you guys, but some of you guys might find it interesting, a little look behind the curtains. So let's take a look here. All right. So what I am going to use, let's use profile. That's pretty clean. Basically, down here is the old constructor I had that set up the old setting groups, which used an array of actual setting types that had fields and properties in there where you could describe stuff like the name, the description. This combo box setting had stuff like where you could set the choice and all that stuff. And this is how I had to define it before. This actually isn't as egregious as some other instances. Let me see. Device wrapper was a real pain in the butt because I actually had to see if I still have it in here or if I already deleted it. Input. Build settings, here we go. I actually had to separate the settings into a separate method where it could actually build out a lot of the options. Down here, this is commented out just because it my recent changes broke it, but this used to be how I used to hook on to the events that fired whenever anything was changed in there, and it was all a big pain in the butt. And pretty much this entire method here, plus some of this other constructor stuff and all that, is now gone. It's actually not used. I could probably just delete it right now, but I'm not going to because I'm not sure if it'll break anything yet. I'm not positive. But that is gone now, and it's reading directly off of the actual properties that were storing the data, that were acting as a middleman before. Now it's just reading directly off of these. So all that code just basically turned into this. Actually not even all that most of that stuff is turned into this, which is the profile selector. And actually that's about it. Yeah, those 20 to 50 lines of code down there turned into this one line of code. So basically everything that's happening here, it's running through what used to be the old device state browser, which I had for debugging purposes, where I could actually let me just run it, show it to you guys. Okay, and it built without an error, so that's good. I didn't actually test this first, but there used to be, and I'm bringing it back, a device state browser where I could actually go in and look live at all of the data that the device was, sending and receiving and all that stuff. And it broke it out into settings and all that stuff. So what I'm doing now is I'm adopting that and I'm turning this into my new settings UI that'll actually determine, you know, what type of setting controls based on the information that's provided in the property. So we'll take a look at that. That window I was just showing, that's what this is. Actually, this is a user control that was inside that window, but basically that window is just a container. But basically, what is happening is I am sending a class to this control here. Whether it is the device wrapper class, I would send this entire class, all this information, I would send it to that control. Or in the case of a profile where you're setting up profile information, it would send this entire profile. You see here, this is all the old stuff that I actually, matter of fact, don't need it anymore. Goodbye. But it was sending this entire profile to that control. And what that control did is it took that incoming monitored class, as we call it, and it passed it through a converter, a property value converter. What this does is, let's go take a look at it. What this basically did is it took that object, and from that object it got every single properties that didn't have a flag of settings UI ignore, meaning I don't want it to be shown to the user. As a side note, this will actually be changed a little bit in the future because I want there to be an option where I can have it hidden for basic users or shown for advanced users. So I want it to be like a 3-step kind of a thing. So this will get a change in the future because I want people that want to change advanced settings to basically be able to go in and change every single variable in InputMapper to diagnose their own issues or to just toy around. But anyways, it'll grab every single property, and what a property is this is a property. It's basically just a variable where I can store information. You can ignore this stuff. The get and set, that's all just special stuff. A property is just a variable where you store the information. In this case, it's a string. It's a string named name. Down here we have another string named output driver. Those are both properties. So anyways, it is going in there and it's grabbing every single one of them. Where did I find out where I left off here? There we go. Anyways, it's going through each of them and it's turning it into a new object called property value. And what this is this is a wrapper that I developed that actually takes that property and it breaks out any of the attributes that might be attached into it into their own properties that can be easily accessed and bound to. And what attributes are is I go back over here and you see these are all my properties. The lines above it that have the square brackets that, you know, specify different, you know, tweaks to it, those are all attributes. So looking here at the profile, I can easily create, you see here we got profile name, we got mapping overrides, and we got output driver. So I just launched IM again. We'll go over here to my profiles, and we got the name, overrides, output driver. Now, if I ever want to add an option to this, it is now super simple. That is a property. It's called Is This Cool? Actually, no, it's not. It's Is This Call. Now it's Is This Cool? So this is a basic rundown version of all of this. The only reason why this has special get and set is because we need to invoke a PropertyChanged event. And this is just an event that's set up to tell programs that to notify anything else that's interested about it that property changed. In this case, this is a regular just checkbox, so we don't really care, or it will be a checkbox. We're just defining it as a bool, which is yes or no. So if we run this again now, just by adding that one little line, if we open up, I got to keep dragging this over here. If we open up a profile, we now see that checkbox. Is this cool? We can go ahead and check it. If we quit the program, and if we were to reopen it, it would be there again. As a matter of fact, we can go to roaming, InputMapper, profiles, new profile JSON. And there you go. You see the benefit of using these extensions that we're now shifting to is not only was I able to get it to show up in the actual UI, it also knows how and where to serialize it. So there it is. It saves a value, so the next time InputMapper runs, it'll pull that value up. So we have this property. Is this cool? Now what this does is we go into the class property browser, and we already talked about that it's putting that into a property value object. And this class here is busting out all of the attributes that are attached to it, which we mentioned before was those extra bits of information that aren't necessary but are good to configure that were in the square brackets, such as we want it to have a user-friendly name, so we have one that's called display name. Maybe we want it to have a tooltip for when they mouse over, so we have a attribute named tooltip. This one is the fancy one. We'll get to that in a second. That's what hung me up on for pretty much a day and a half to 2 days. Anyways, is this cool? It goes into the class property browser, which goes through that converter, busts it into those property value types. And you see here, this is grabbing that information that class breaks out. So now we can grab the display name, we can grab stuff like the icon, we can grab stuff like the tooltip, we can grab stuff like the edit control style if we want to override that, and that's one of the options in the custom UI attribute that I'll look at in a second here too. But basically it's grabbing all this and it is creating a content control based on what the type is. And it's determining that type, go up here, by a large list, or not, it'll get larger as I come up with more stuff. But anyways, this list just goes through, and it's basically a series of if-then statements. There's a trigger setter where it determines, is the type of object we're looking at, is it a class? If it is, we're going to use a style called sub-item template. Is it a string? If it is, we're going to use just a text box. Is it a profile selector? If it is, we're going to use a profile selector. Is it a bool, which is what we just added? If it is, then we're going to use a checkbox. So we'll go ahead and look at that. This is pretty basic. So here's the checkbox template. It's really simple. It's just a checkbox. Is checked based on that value. Some other ones are more complicated, such as mapping collection. Here's the control for mapping collection compared to that one item, which is just the checkbox. Mapping collection has a lot of data it has to store and be able to display correctly. And this is where the other control was having, or the old setting groups and properties were having an issue. It was having trouble deciphering the data that was stored in that one property into all this other stuff, but that's not an issue anymore. So yeah, basically this class property browser, this is the user control that determines what the property type is, and it displays the corresponding user control for it. So if we go back over into profile, We have all these cool, like up here you can see all these attributes that we can add to it where we can change, because Is This Cool isn't a very user-friendly name. So we have stuff like custom name. So we can apply custom name and make it a little bit more user-friendly. Is this cool? Now when we run it, it'll still save as this camel-cased variable name, but when the user looks at it in the profile, it'll have the much more friendly name. And you see it's still checked from the last time because it was able to restore the settings which are being serialized. So not only that, but we can do some other cool stuff using this. One of the hard ones was being able to send additional information which the compiler doesn't know at compile time, but it needs to know at runtime. And what that means is like we can only send like basic primitives using these attributes like strings, numeric values, stuff like that. But I needed to be able to send like complex data, like custom types and stuff like that. So what we did was we added a new attribute called custom UI settings, and all this weird stuff here. Remember, we can only send a string, so we had to send the data in a string format. This is just JSON, JSON. So we can send specific data, like what kind of control to use now, in a JSON formatted string, which is really cool because in the which is cool because in that wrapper class we bust that out into an object, and in binding we can just access it by going in here, custom UI settings, and we look at the sub property control. So we have control output driver selection, and we say we can go in here, say control, if it happens to equal output driver selection, that text box isn't going to be treated like a text box anymore. Now it's going to be treated like a output driver drop down. So that's just an example of how we were able to add more information in than the actual code construct wants us to, because the compiler wants that stuff to just be basic strings and stuff like that. So all of that said and done, I can now add settings all over the application just by adding a couple lines of code here. The settings will save. It'll be there next time the user launches the application. It'll be strongly typed now, instead of going into from an unknown variable into text and then trying to determine what kind of variable it should deserialize that into, since it went into is just text. Now it'll actually know, because all those variables will have a type. It'll be a string or a decimal or a double, or whatever the case may be. So the serialization is going to be a lot better. Blah blah blah. Basically, I have it working now where the settings so far. I have the profile selector drop down box and the driver selection drop down box. I just finished up the mapping overrides this morning. It needs a tad bit of UI tweaking. It's clipping in some areas. That's just silly little stuff I can do pretty easily. So those were the big things to actually get it to just plain out work again with these overrides. So I am going to finish up those UI tweaks, make sure it is usable. I'm going to create an override, make sure that works, delete it, make sure all that stuff works, simple stuff. And then I'm going to go ahead and push a new alpha this morning. Hopefully a couple of you guys can stress test that a little bit, make sure that all my new settings, serialization, deserialization, UI, all that stuff is flowing the way it should. I don't imagine there's going to be any problems because this method is a lot more streamlined, but just to be safe. So I'm going to put that out, and then I am going to continue to catch back up to where the old settings classes used to be. I have to build out color swatch selectors. I have to build the user control and handling and all that stuff for that. What else? I had file name, dialog box, stuff like that. Macro commands and actions. Even though I haven't gotten to macros yet, the command and actions were being used in the like the profile, the app detection, the switching and the trigger and all that stuff. I have to rebuild that. The actual app detection settings class, that has to be redone. So I just have to, now that I know that it's working, I just have to catch up and translate all that stuff into this new method. The good part is it should be fairly easy because this new way is a lot more intuitive, because applications, this entire application uses class objects in the background anyways. So to just be able to pass that class object and say, hey, turn this into user editable settings is a great plus for me. That's about it, guys. As far as this stuff, keep fooling around with the website. Like I said, that's really how the project is being supported now. Most of the most of the revenue income for InputMapper has transitioned over to ad supported now through the website. So you guys going on there and, you know, just chatting it up, or you know, looking for solutions or commenting or any of that stuff, is really how the project is supported anymore, as our donations start to reach that plateau, because we aren't getting that many new people in anymore. Keep using the website. Make sure you check out the beta website, which is where this upload that I'm going to do today is going. Everything is pointing towards the new beta website. Even the old link on the old website, when you go to download this alpha, it's going to go to the beta website. The new website is beta. This application is alpha. There's a distinction there. So that's about it, guys. Thank you for all the support. Keep it up, and I will see you next week.